Let's start with the first and most unsettling shift, because this is often the moment people tell me something changed and I can't unsee it. Early on, narcissistic behavior is wrapped in charm. There's warmth, charisma, even moments that feel deeply human. That's not accidental. That charm is a tool. It's a strategy designed to draw you in, to earn your trust, to make you doubt your own perceptions when the cracks start to show. But when a narcissist moves into this darker phase, that strategy is no longer necessary. The mask comes off, not in a dramatic way, but in a disturbingly casual one. What people often describe as not an explosion, but an absence. The apologies disappear, the explanations stop, the effort evaporates. You might notice they no longer try to justify their behavior or even pretend to care how it affects you. Where there was once a performance of concern, there is now indifference. And that indifference is chilling. It tells you that the person across from you has decided you no longer matter enough to deceive. This is when people say they didn't even argue anymore. And that's important. Arguing requires engagement. It requires seeing the other person as real. At this stage, the narcissist no longer needs to convince you of anything. They assume dominance. They assume entitlement. They assume that whatever they do will stand simply because they did it. That's not confidence. That's dehumanization. You may notice that cruelty becomes more efficient. There's no dramatic buildup, no emotional chaos like before. The remarks are sharper, more dismissive. The silence lasts longer. Decisions are made without discussion. And when you express hurt, you're met with a blank stare, a shrug, or a cold dismissal. Not rage, not defensiveness, just nothing. And for many people, that nothing hurts more than any insult ever did. This is also when people realize they've been downgraded from a person to an object. Objects don't require empathy. Objects don't deserve explanations. Objects are used, discarded, or ignored. When the narcissist stops pretending to be good, it's because they've stopped seeing you as fully human. And that realization can be deeply destabilizing because it forces you to confront something you've likely been trying not to see for a long time. There's another layer here that's important. When the mask drops, the narcissist often feels a sense of relief. Pretending to be decent takes energy. Faking remorse takes effort. Once they believe you're trapped, emotionally, financially, socially, they feel free to be exactly who they are. And who they are, in this phase, is someone who no longer values connection, only control. People often ask, why now? And the answer is usually painful but simple. The narcissist believes they've won. They believe you won't leave, won't challenge them, won't expose them. So the performance ends. What's left is entitlement without restraint, power without conscience. And that's why this stage feels so different from everything that came before it. If you're listening to this and recognizing it, I want to be very clear. This is not misunderstanding. This is not stress. This is not a phase. This is a fundamental shift in how that person is relating to you. And once you've seen it, your nervous system knows it. Your body knows it. That quiet alarm you feel, that's clarity. Because when someone stops pretending to be good, they're telling you exactly who they are. And believing them may be the most important step you ever take. Now let's move into the second sign. And this is where things stop being confusing and start being truly frightening. This is the moment when you realize that your pain is no longer an accident in the relationship. It has become the point of it. Earlier on, a narcissist might hurt you and then deny it, minimize it, or blame you for it. There was at least the illusion that the harm was unintended. But when things turn darker, something shifts. Your pain starts to energize them. People often tell me it was like they lit up when I was upset. And that observation is deeply important. When a narcissist reaches this stage, your distress becomes proof of their power. Your tears, your confusion, your emotional exhaustion, these are not signals to stop. They are signals that the narcissist still has control. And control, not connection, is the drug. You might notice that the cruelty becomes more targeted. They know exactly which words will hurt you the most. They bring up old wounds you trusted them with. They time their attacks for moments when you're already vulnerable. Before an important event, during illness, when you're tired or overwhelmed. That's not impulsive. That's strategic. And strategy requires awareness. which means this isn't a lack of empathy, it's the absence of it. At this stage, the narcissist isn't just indifferent to your suffering, they are reinforced by it. Your reaction reassures them that they still matter, still dominate, still occupy space in your mind. Silence feels threatening to them, but anguish feels nourishing. This is why they provoke. This is why they escalate. This is why peace never lasts. Calm feels like losing. And here's the part that deeply destabilizes people. The narcissist may actually appear calmer the more upset you become. While you're unraveling, they seem steady, grounded, even amused. That emotional asymmetry is not accidental. It's a power move. It sends a silent message: I control the emotional climate here, not you. People in this phase often ask themselves, am I overreacting? Or why does this feel intentional? That self-doubt is not a flaw in you. It's the result of prolonged exposure to someone who benefits from your confusion. When your pain becomes someone else's fuel, you will naturally start questioning your own reality. That's how psychological domination works. This is also where empathy completely disappears. Not just emotional empathy, but moral restraint. You may be crying, pleading, explaining, and they look bored, or irritated, or cold. And that moment is devastating because it shatters the hope that if you just explain it the right way, they'll finally understand. They already understand. They just don't care. In fact, caring would interfere with the payoff. Remorse would interrupt the sense of superiority. Accountability would require seeing you as an equal human being, and at this stage, equality is intolerable to them. Your pain reassures them that they are above you, stronger than you, untouchable. What makes this especially dangerous is that people often try harder here. They become more emotional, more expressive, more desperate to be heard, and without realizing it, they are feeding the very dynamic that is harming them. The narcissist learns, if I push here, they collapse. If I withdraw here, they chase. And so the cycle tightens. If you're listening to this and recognizing yourself, I want you to hear this clearly. Your pain is not evidence of your weakness. It is evidence of prolon. Jed exposure to someone who has learned to weaponize your humanity, your empathy, your emotional depth, your capacity to feel. These are not flaws. They are simply being exploited. And the most important thing to understand is this: when someone derives power from your suffering, explaining your pain will never make it stop. Only removing their access to it will. Because the moment your pain no longer feeds them is the moment their power begins to collapse. Let's talk about the third sign, because this is where many people feel like they're losing their grip on reality itself. This is the moment when the narcissist doesn't just twist the truth anymore, they replace it. Earlier in the relationship, you may have noticed selective memory, defensiveness, or a tendency to reinterpret events in their favor. But at this stage, that subtle distortion gives way to something far more unsettling. They rewrite reality without hesitation, without shame, and without concern for whether it makes sense. People often say to me, I know what happened, I was there, and yet somehow I'm being told it never occurred. That experience is profoundly destabilizing. When someone calmly denies things you clearly remember, words they said, actions they took, promises they made, it creates a kind of cognitive whiplash. You start replaying conversations in your head. You second-guess your memory. You wonder if you misunderstood, exaggerated, or imagined it. And that self-doubt doesn't come from now. Here, it's cultivated. At this point, the narcissist isn't trying to resolve conflict. They're trying to dominate the narrative. Truth becomes inconvenient if it doesn't serve them. So it gets erased. They'll say, that never happened, or you're too sensitive, or you're remembering it wrong, with complete confidence. And the confidence is key, because when someone lies badly, it's easier to catch. But when someone lies calmly, consistently, and without visible discomfort, it makes you question yourself instead. What's especially disturbing here is how easily they fabricate. Entire conversations are invented. Motives are reassigned. Blame is reversed. And when you point out contradictions, they don't correct themselves. They double down. Logic doesn't matter. Evidence doesn't matter. Your emotional response doesn't matter. The goal is not accuracy. The goal is authority. And slowly, something dangerous happens. You begin to feel like the ground beneath you isn't solid anymore. You stop trusting your instincts. You hesitate before speaking up because you're afraid of being told you're wrong again. This is how people become quiet. This is how people become compliant. Not because they agree, but because arguing with someone who denies reality is exhausting. At this stage, the narcissist also begins recruiting allies, people who will echo their version of events or at least question yours. You might hear, "That doesn't sound like them," or "Are you sure you're not misunderstanding?" And now the gaslighting is no longer happening in private. It's happening in the open. That isolation deepens the damage because now it feels like it's not just you against them. It's you against the world. This is also where accountability becomes impossible. You can't resolve a problem if the other person refuses to acknowledge it exists. You can't heal an injury that someone insists you never sustained. And over time, you may find yourself doing something heartbreaking, giving up on being understood. You stop explaining. You stop correcting. You stop fighting for the truth. And that silence can look like peace from the outside, but inside, it's surrender. I want to be very clear about something here. This level of reality distortion is not a communication issue. It's not a misunderstanding. And it's not something you can fix by explaining better or staying calmer. This is a tactic. When someone rewrites reality without shame, it's because they've decided that your perception is disposable. And here's the part people don't talk about enough. This isn't just about control over you. It's about control over themselves. Accepting reality would require the narcissist to face responsibility, guilt, or vulnerability, and that is intolerable to them. So instead, they choose fiction and demand that you live in it too. If you're listening and recognizing this pattern, I want you to know that your confusion is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign that you've been exposed to sustained psychological manipulation. Your clarity didn't disappear, it was undermined. And the fact that you're questioning things now may actually mean you're waking up. Because when someone insists their version of reality matters more than the truth, believing yourself becomes an act of self-preservation. And reclaiming your reality is often the first step toward reclaiming your freedom. Let's move into the fourth sign, because this is often the moment people finally realize that nothing they do will ever be right enough. This is where boundaries, healthy, reasonable boundaries, don't lead to discussion or self-reflection. They trigger rage, and not always loud rage. Sometimes it's cold, sometimes it's calculated, but it is punishment every time. Early on, you may have been encouraged to speak up. You were told your needs mattered. You were invited to share your feelings. But once the narcissist has shifted into this darker phase, boundaries are no longer seen as communication. They're seen as defiance. A boundary says, "I am a separate person." And to someone who needs control, that feels like betrayal. So what happens when you say no, when you stop explaining, when you pull back emotionally or physically? You don't get respect, you get retaliation. The silent treatment stretches on for days or weeks. Affection is withheld. Resources are controlled. You may be met with sudden cruelty, mockery, or threats disguised as concern, and all of it carry as the same message: you will pay for not complying. What's important to understand is that this reaction isn't impulsive. It's not emotional dysregulation, it's conditioning. The narcissist is teaching you that autonomy has consequences, that safety comes from compliance, that peace is earned by erasing yourself. And over time, many people learn this lesson without ever consciously realizing it. They stop setting boundaries not because they don't need them, but because the cost feels too high. You might notice that even the smallest limits provoke outsized responses. You don't answer a text immediately, and suddenly you're accused of being selfish or ungrateful. You decline a request, and you're punished with withdrawal or hostility. You calmly state what you're not okay with, and the conversation shifts to everything you've ever done wrong. This isn't conflict resolution, it's control maintenance. And here's where it gets especially confusing. The narcissist may accuse you of being abusive for setting boundaries. They'll say you're cold, cruel, distant, or selfish. They'll frame your self-protection as an attack on them. This reversal is deeply disorienting because it taps into your empathy. You start worrying about being too harsh, even as your own needs are ignored. At this stage, reflection is completely absent. A healthy person might feel uncomfortable when confronted with a boundary, but they can sit with that discomfort. They can ask questions. They can edge. UST. The narcissist in this phase cannot tolerate that feeling. Any limit you set threatens their sense of dominance. And rather than examine themselves, they externalize the discomfort onto you. This is also where smear campaigns often begin. If you assert independence, they may start telling others how difficult you are, how unstable you've become, how you've changed. The goal is twofold: to punish you socially and to preemptively discredit you. Because someone who sets boundaries is someone who might eventually tell the truth. Over time, you may find yourself walking on eggshells again, not because you don't know your boundaries, but because enforcing them feels dangerous. That's not weakness, that's a nervous system responding to threat. When boundaries trigger retaliation, your body learns that safety comes from silence. And that's how people lose themselves in relationships without ever intending to. I want to pause here and say this clearly. Boundaries are not aggression. They are not cruelty. They are not abandonment. They are information. And when someone responds to information with punishment, it tells you everything you need to know about the relationship. If you were listening to this and recognizing this pattern, please understand this. The problem is not that your boundaries are too rigid. The problem is that your boundaries interfere with someone else's control. And that is not something you can negotiate away. Because when a person punishes you for protecting yourself, they are not asking for closeness. They are demanding submission, and no relationship that requires your silence to survive is worth the cost of your self-respect. Now we come to the fifth sign, and this is where the goal of the narcissist shifts in a way that feels especially dark. Earlier on, everything revolved around winning. Winning arguments, winning admiration, winning control. But at this stage, winning is no longer enough. The focus turns toward dismantling you, toward isolation, toward erosion. This is no longer about looking superior. It's about making sure you feel small. You may notice that they begin subtly, and then not so subtly, cutting you off from support. They criticize your friends, they question your family's intentions. They plant seeds of doubt about people who care about you. They don't really have your best interests at heart. They're jealous of us. They're turning you against me. Over time, you may find yourself pulling away from others just to avoid conflict, not realizing how much ground you're losing. Isolation is powerful because it removes perspective. When you're alone with a narcissist's version of reality, it becomes harder to challenge it, and that's exactly the point. The fewer voices you hear, the louder theirs becomes. And once they've established that dominance, the attacks deepen. This is also where confidence destruction accelerates. Your achievements are minimized. Your strengths are mocked. Your past successes are reframed as luck, exaggeration, or manipulation. Anything that gives you a sense of identity outside of them becomes a threat, so it must be undermined. Slowly, consistently, relentlessly. What's particularly painful is that this stage often includes moments of deliberate sabotage. Important events are ruined. Opportunities are dismissed or obstructed. You may notice that when something good is about to happen for you, a crisis suddenly appears, a fight is picked, a withdrawal occurs. The message is clear: your growth destabilizes me, and at this point, the narcissist may not even seem to care if they look cruel. In fact, they may seem satisfied by the impact. Watching you doubt yourself, withdraw from others, or lose your spark becomes the reward. This is where people often say, "It felt like they wanted me to disappear." And that feeling is not an exaggeration. This isn't just emotional abuse anymore. It's psychological erasure. Your sense of self is chipped away piece by piece. You begin to censor yourself. You stop sharing dreams. You lower expectations, not because you've changed, but because hope has become dangerous. When someone consistently punishes your vitality, your nervous system learns to dim your light just to survive. What makes this stage especially devastating is that the narcissist often frames their behavior as concern. "I'm just being honest. I'm trying to protect you. You can't trust anyone but me." And because you've already been worn down, those messages can slip in quietly, without resistance. Isolation starts to feel normal. Dependence starts to feel inevitable. But I want to be very clear here. A person who loves you does not need to shrink your world to stay central in it. They don't need to break your confidence to maintain closeness. They don't need to destroy your sense of self to feel secure. When someone moves from wanting to win to wanting to annihilate, that's not insecurity anymore. That's domination. People often ask, why would someone do this? And the answer is unsettling, because a diminished you feels safer to them. A disconnected you is easier to control. A doubting you is less likely to leave. This isn't about hatred. It's about preservation of power at any cost. If you're listening and recognizing this, please know this. The part of you that feels smaller right now is not gone. It's been suppressed. And suppression is reversible. Isolation can be undone. Confidence can be rebuilt. Perspective can return. But only if you stop participating in a dynamic that requires your disappearance. Because the moment someone needs you to be less so they can feel more is the moment you've outgrown that relationship. Now we reach the final sign, and this one often surprises people because it looks quiet from the outside. There's no shouting, no dramatic confrontation, no obvious explosion. Instead, there's a shift inside you. You stop reacting the way you used to. You stop explaining. You stop chasing clarity. And something remarkable happens when that change takes place. The narcissist becomes unsettled. Because your detachment, your emotional distance, is the one thing they cannot control. For a long time, your reactions were the fuel. Your questions, your tears, your attempts to fix things. All of that confirmed that they mattered, that they had power, that they could still reach inside you and move things around. But when you begin to detach, when you no longer respond the way they expect, the dynamic collapses. And that loss of access is terrifying to someone who relies on control to feel real. You may notice that as you grow calmer, they grow more agitated. As you become quieter, they become louder. As you stop engaging, they escalate. This is not coincidence. Detachment removes the reward, and when the reward disappears, the behavior intensifies. People often say, as soon as I stopped reacting, things got worse. That's not because detachment is wrong. It's because it exposes the truth. This is where the narcissist's darkness becomes fully visible. Without your emotional energy to manipulate, they may resort to more extreme tactics: provocation, guilt, intimidation, or sudden displays of vulnerability meant to pull you back in. They may accuse you of being cold or heartless. They may claim you've changed, that you've become cruel. What they're really saying is, I can't reach you the way I used to. And here's the crucial part. Detachment is not cruelty. It's clarity. It's the moment you stop trying to get someone to understand you and start understanding them instead. It's when you recognize that your peace does not require their permission. And for someone who depends on emotional chaos to feel powerful, that kind of calm is deeply threatening. You might feel guilty during this phase. You might worry that you're being unfair or unkind. That guilt comes from your empathy, the very thing that's been used against you all along. But empathy without boundaries is self-erasure. Detachment is what allows empathy to exist without destroying you. What often follows is escalation. The narcissist may cycle rapidly between charm and cruelty, trying to figure out what still works. They may provoke conflict just to see if you'll react. They may create emergencies that require your attention. They may rewrite history one last time, hoping to pull you back into the old patterns. This is not a sign of love. It's a sign of loss of control. And if you stay grounded through it, if you resist the urge to explain, justify, or defend, something important happens. You start to see how predictable it all is. The chaos that once felt personal begins to look mechanical. And when behavior stops feeling personal, it loses its power. Detachment also brings grief. It's the grief of accepting that the relationship you hoped for was never really possible. It's the grief of letting go of the fantasy. And that grief is real, but it is also clean. It doesn't require self-betrayal. It doesn't demand your silence. It doesn't ask you to disappear. I want to say this clearly, especially for anyone who is in this stage right now. Detachment does not mean you didn't care. It means you cared enough about yourself to stop bleeding. It means you finally chose your nervous system over someone else's ego. And that choice is powerful because when you no longer provide the emotional supply that feeds someone's darkness, you don't just weaken their hold, you reclaim your life. And that quiet reclaiming of yourself is the beginning of freedom.